Today, we're jumping into a really fascinating review from The Guardian. It's about a new book that tries to answer a question that's, well, as old as time, but with a totally modern spin. The book's called Want, and it's this huge project trying to map out what modern female desire really looks like.
So what do women really want? I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? It's also the big idea behind a book curated by the actor Gillian Anderson. She collected anonymous sexual fantasies from women all over the world, and we're going to unpack what The Guardian thought about the whole thing. Okay, let's get into it.
First things first, to really get what this project is all about, you have to know that it's not a totally new idea. The review in The Guardian frames Want as a 21st century sequel to a truly revolutionary study from back in the 1970s. You could say it's a project that's standing on the shoulders of a giant.
And that giant was Nancy Friday and her 1973 book, My Secret Garden. Now, here's a cool little detail. Gillian Anderson actually found Friday's book when she was doing research for her role as the sex therapist Jean Milburn in Sex Education. She said the unfiltered and painful honesty of those original letters just completely floored her, and, well, it sparked the idea for this whole new project.
So that spark turned into a massive question. After a full half-century of incredible social change, how have women's inner lives, their private desires, actually evolved? What's different now? And maybe even more interesting, what has somehow stayed exactly the same?
And you know, that 50-year gap is it's huge. I mean, think about it. Between 1973 and today, you've got second and third wave feminism, the sexual revolution, the actual birth of the internet, and a total transformation of media. Anderson wanted to know what kind of impact all of that had on women's most secret thoughts.
The way they collected the stories alone tells you just how much the world has changed. Back in the 70s, Nancy Friday had to literally place an anonymous ad in a newspaper and then wait for physical letters to come in the mail. Anderson, on the other hand, she just set up an online portal called Dear Gillian, and boom, submissions came flooding in from all over the world. We're talking nearly 1,000 pages of material.
Okay, so what did all those submissions actually say? Let's get into the real meat of the book, the content, and Anderson's specific role in putting it all together, at least according to the review.
The article makes it super clear that Anderson is very careful about her position here. She's not trying to be her character from Sex Education. She says it herself, loud and clear. She is not an expert, not a therapist. Her job was simply to be a curator, to choose, organize, and then present these anonymous letters to the world.
And get this, in a really fun little twist, she kind of added a game for the reader. Anderson actually hid her own anonymous fantasy somewhere inside the book's pages. She even cheekily asks, would it match people's assumptions about me? It's this playful little challenge that really speaks to the book's themes of anonymity and perception.
The sheer variety of what's in there is just fascinating. I mean, the fantasies cover all the stuff you might expect, like kink and power dynamics. But they also go into some really deep emotional places, from, painful longing and grief, all the way to these funny, joyful celebrations of pleasure. The Guardian also points out the very clear and maybe not so surprising influence of 50 Shades of Grey on both the style and the content of some of the letters. Now, while the review is pretty positive overall, the writer for The Guardian did focus on one major point of criticism, calling one of the editorial choices about the data they collected baffling. So here's the deal. The project collected all this data on things like nationality, religion, and even earning power. But, and this is the part the reviewer found so baffling, they left out age. The article makes a great point that this was a really strange choice. I mean, knowing if a fantasy came from a 20-year-old or a 7-year-old gives you so much crucial context that something like earning power just doesn't really provide. Okay, this brings us to some of the most complex and sensitive themes that the book explores. This whole relationship between power, control, and the taboos that are still hanging around even today. The review is really clear that this book does not shy away from difficult subjects. A lot of the fantasies explore scenarios with coercion and violence that would be absolutely terrifying in real life. The article even mentioned a kind of palpable nervousness from both Anderson and some of the contributors when talking about these darker themes. And this all boils down to one critical concept: agency. That is the bright, clear line that separates a private, controlled fantasy from real-world abuse. As the review really emphasizes, in a fantasy, the writer is always in charge. They're the director, making their own choices no matter what the story is.
And here's maybe the most surprising discovery of all. After 50 years of what we think of as progress,
So many of the old taboos are still there. The article highlights that a really powerful theme running through the letters is this feeling of crushing shame that so many women still feel. It's just a stark reminder that even with huge social changes, those deeply ingrained ideas about what women should want, well, they can be incredibly hard to get rid of.
So, this brings us to the big takeaway. What's the ultimate point of a book like this? Why does a collection of fantasies matter right here, right now? Well, it turns out it's about a lot more than just sex.
The Guardian's review just puts it perfectly. They argue that in a world where women's agency and their freedom to express themselves are being challenged, any platform that allows us to speak up is to be applauded. And that's especially true when it's about a part of their lives so often hidden away in shame.
At the end of the day, the review really sees the book as a success. It calls it an intriguing cabinet of curiosities. It's a project that isn't trying to give us easy answers. Instead, it just celebrates the huge, complex, and glorious variety of women's inner lives.
And all of this leaves us with a really powerful final question to chew on. The book suggests that our fantasies are the one place where we can be totally, completely free. If that's really true, then what does the content of that freedom, our deepest desires, our fears, our longings, what does that truly tell us about the pressures and constraints we face in the rest of our lives? It's a thought definitely worth exploring long after this is over.